Holy crap, that is ripe! Have you seen these meat piles indoors before? They're so putrid that the flesh is starting to become green, and flies are swarming around them. This is absolutely rancid, yet I guess we must persist in order to figure out what is going on here. Alright, so in case you weren't aware, hands down one of the biggest mysteries in all of Doors is what is the deal with Figure's meat? Whenever Figure is present somewhere, these disgusting piles of muscle and tissue are always alongside him. And this raises the interesting question of how they even got here and what they even are. This mystery has been so prevalent that time and time again I keep coming back to it just to ponder what it all means. But now I think I may have figured it out, pun intended. So, in this video, we'll be dumpster diving into one of the biggest and smelliest mysteries in all of Roblox Doors. And in the process, we'll discover what truly is going on behind Figure's meat piles. So, with all of that being said, let's begin. Alright, so before we get knee-deep into these pungent flesh piles, let's just get a quick rundown of them for anyone new to this topic. Essentially, all of the boss entities indoors have physical items or decorations associated with them to mark their presence. For example, whenever Seek is present, these black eyes on the walls are as well. And whenever Grumbles are present, players will find dead piles of mutilated Screeches. Now, both Seek and the Grumbles decorations are pretty self-explanatory in terms of their backstories. Seek's eyes are just an extension of the entity itself, and the Screech piles are the remains of Screeches who attempted to infect the Grumbles and lost in that battle. The issue is, this self-explanatory nature doesn't exist for the item that marks Figure's presence, that being the festering meat. These are orange-colored piles of flesh that closely resemble the muscle and tissue on Figure's own body. And besides canonically smelling absolutely horrible, we know next to nothing about how they came to be. There is barely any direct evidence in-game providing context to what these flesh piles are or how they got here. And this means the only way to figure out what's going on with these meat piles is to go into the realm of speculation and theory crafting. Now, before we get into that, let's go over the evidence. In terms of location, the festering meat piles appear in every room the player can encounter Figure in, such as the library and electrical room. However, they can also appear in rooms Figure has implied to have been in. For example, after players escape the library, they can encounter ruined rooms, hotel rooms that have furniture thrown all over the place, claw marks on the walls, and most notably, these flesh piles rotting on the floor. Now, although Figure can't spawn in these ruined rooms, we know based on dialogue from El Goblino that the reason they are destroyed is because Figure rampaged through them. So it makes sense for the meat piles to be there, as Figure was there at some point. Additionally, the meat piles can also be found in the courtyard basement, which is a secret cellar room located underneath the courtyard. Now, the developers have confirmed that Figure canonically travels from the library to the electrical room via player-inaccessible pathways, so it's likely the courtyard basement was one of these pathways. But even with all of that being said, there is still something very peculiar about the locations of these flesh piles. You see, the festering meat doesn't just spawn in rooms that Figure has been and is in, but also in rooms he will be in. The first time Figure is encountered in the mines, they drop down a pipe from the ceiling, yet the room has the meat piles present before the entity's arrival. This also is the case for Figure's third encounter in the mines, where similarly, they drop down into a room already containing festering meat. Additionally, based on dialogue from El Goblino, Figure has never been to the mines prior to the player bringing them down at the end of the hotel, so this is their first time in those rooms. This is important as it disproves a very common theory around these absolutely disgusting muscle masses, that being they aren't directly caused by Figure. One of my earliest theories about these meat piles is that Figure sheds their own skin, resulting in these meat piles appearing wherever they do. But given how they have appeared multiple times in areas Figure has never been inside of, it means he cannot be the reason for their existence. Now, this leads me to the next point I want to make. That being, instead of trying to decipher how Figure is connected to these meat piles, we should look at it the other way around. As you may know, although Figure is blind, they actually have heightened other senses, most notably hearing but also smell. The issue is that Figure himself smells so rancid thanks to his rotting flesh that his super olfactory senses are completely blocked out by his own stench. This means that he is very likely familiar with his own smell, and given how the meat piles seen throughout the game appear to be made of the same material as Figure, it would be likely they smell the same. So, this brings me to my first theory about the flesh piles, that being that Figure uses them to navigate throughout the hotel and the mines. As I have said, we know Figure has an extraordinary sense of smell, yet most of it is obscured by his own stench. So it's possible Figure is so familiar with his putrid odor. Putrid odor. This is like the third time I've done that take, I'm not doing that again. He is so familiar with his putrid odor that he can sense other things that smell similar to it, such as the flesh piles, and that attracts him to go towards them as it is something he is familiar with. Now, it's always been a very big question as to how Figure knows exactly where to go in the hotel and the mines, but it's possible it could just be as simple as him sniffing out scents he's familiar with and moving towards them, even if they are quite rancid. Now, that is good and all, but what does that have to do with the origins of the meat piles? Well, I actually have a few theories as to how they came to be. As we had previously discussed, Figure is not the source of the meat, but it's possible the reality is actually the other way around, where the meat is actually the source of Figure. Given how they seem to be made of the same fleshy substance, now, if we take a look at Figure's design, they seem to be an amalgamation of flesh and bone that has been reanimated, not with the typical shape of a human, but of a severely deformed humanoid figure, featuring anomalies such as an external ribcage and, most notably, giant mouth. Figure visually appears to be the combination of several deceased corpses, and if they were created from the same meat substance as these flesh piles, then they too are probably made out of dead bodies. But whose bodies could they be? Well, I believe it's actually yours. Now, something you may not have known about Doors is every single death in the game is canon. Your player character is canonically immortal, yet each death you have leaves behind a body. Given how many people play Doors, and how each of their many deaths are canon, I think it's possible these flesh piles could be the remains of dead players piling up over and over again, and somehow, through extraordinary means, the Figure entity was born from it. Now, there is one flaw to this theory, that being that the meat piles can appear in areas players have never died in or never even accessed. This means that unless the flesh grows 2 legs and walks away, it physically can't move. Oh wait, it has done that with Figure, but let's just ignore that. So, with this in mind, what other explanations for how the meat piles came to be is there? Well, the answer I have is a lot more speculative, so just hear me out on this. As you may know, the mysterious Third Red Architect is associated with the entities as well as making the game more challenging, so an argument could be made that they are deliberately relocating Figure to rooms in front of us in order to stop us from progressing. Now, initially, I theorized the red light would do this by playing noises throughout the hotel to lead Figure to the various different rooms, but given how I now believe Figure travels via smelling the meat piles, it's possible the red light themselves just placed them in rooms they wanted Figure to be present in, and the entity was able to navigate towards those rooms all by himself through the smell. In this sense, the red light themselves simply just created the meat piles out of nothing in order to lure Figure to certain rooms in front of the player. In front of the player. Why did I hesitate there? Why am I talking about it? Let's just move on. So, they lure Figure to certain rooms in front of the player with the meat piles, which is in fact an ability we know they have, as other architects are able to create matter out of thin air. Now, both of those theories I presented, as well as how Figure uses the smell of the meat piles to navigate, are all very speculative. But I feel they are good interpretations of what these meat piles are given the very little information we have on them so far. The developers have confirmed that we'll be learning a lot more about Figure in Floor 3, so hopefully when that releases we finally get an explanation to the meat piles. So with all of that being said, let me know in the comments what you think of these theories, and thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.